Welcome, everybody, to 5D University, and today's topic is what is the Ascension? A lot of people ask this question, and there's a lot of different explanations that people give, and I think there is some confusion out there of what is the Ascension? What is the process? What does that mean? Okay, so if we look at the word Ascension, it means to ascend and to go beyond one way of being to another way of being, or, to ascend out of something, to ascend to something. You're going to a higher state. So what we are in is a planetary ascension. So basically, we are ascending from one state of being to a higher state of being. So we can look at the ascension process as what is the process of going from living in a 3D dimensional state to then a 4D dimensional state and ultimately to a 5D dimensional state. So for us as a planet and for humanity, the process of ascension means that first we have to awaken to the truth that we have been living in an illusionary state. That is the first part of the awakening process. That is the first part of the ascension process. So the third dimensional state is in what we pretty much exist in now, although we are into the 4D levels now. The third dimensional state is the lowest dimension that one can go in an incarnation. So 2D and 1D are not dimensional states in which souls can incarnate because it's too low of a dimension and it can't actually house soul energy. So those are just elemental type states. So the third dimensional state is what you see around you. It is hard matter, what we perceive as solid matter. And it is also a state of amnesia. So the third dimensional state is where you can only perceive what you can sense. And this is going to be the biggest difference between the state that we're in now and the ascended state. So in the third dimensional state, you can only perceive anywhere between 1% to 5% of all energy in existence. And this means that you have a very limited perception. So we can only perceive things that we can touch, that we can taste, that we can smell, that we can hear, and what we can see with our eyes. That is the third dimensional state. And in this third dimensional state, we have the perception, which is very limited, that we are all separate entities, right? So you can think of the third dimension as the dimension of individual experience, right? It's the dimension of individuality, but also of separation. So, if I have an object in my hand, right? Like we'll take this is a carnelian crystal ball. This object is perceived by my eyes. I can also touch it. I can see it. And I perceive this object to be separate from me. It is an object that I can pick up. It is an object that I can place somewhere. It is a separate object to me. But the truth is that this object is made up of the exact same energy that I am. This object just has atoms that have come together in this expression, and my physical vessel has atoms that have come together in this expression. So in 3D, we're very external. We externalize everything. We view ourselves as separate from everything. We view ourselves as separate from nature, separate from God, separate from humanity. We view ourselves as separate individuals when really we are all one shared consciousness, just expressing itself through different vessels. So the third dimension is very external. And this is part of the illusion because humanity was programmed, and I'll have to do a completely separate video on the ego mind and, what was done to humanity that we got to this point. But essentially, we are stuck in a mind illusion. So we can only see externally outside of ourselves. And we have had very little awareness of who we actually are and our internal true selves. And so when we have events or experiences in the 3D, they appear to be outside of us, right? We have this idea that things happen to us and that the world and the events and the experiences that we manifest in our life are somehow outside of our control. They're just random events. And this produces the fear and the fight or flight that we are stuck in. And again, I will cover that in its own video. But when we have that perception, we lack the understanding that we are in fact a part of everything around us. And everything around us is a reflection of us. We have created reality through our internal state. And so the external is really just a reflection of the internal state of humanity. So when you have events in the world that are seemingly negative, those are manifestations of the internal energy and the internal state of humanity. But because we don't have that full understanding here in the 3D realm, we have basically continued to create a cycle where we continue to create negative events, negative emotions, negative experiences, and we don't understand that in order to change those events, you cannot try to change the external. You have to change the internal, which will then manifest and reflect a different reality. So the first part of ascending or awakening out of the 3D state is first to recognize that you're in an illusion. And when we say that, what we mean is that the 3D world that we see is an illusion. Why we say it's like a video game is because it's simulated, meaning it is a simulated game and it is a simulated environment that is manifested through consciousness. The illusionary part is, again, that we feel we have no control over anything outside of ourselves, that we don't have control. And I always hear people say, well, how can I as one person make a change? And again, if we're looking at that from an external viewpoint, then of course it's going to be very challenging for one single person. How are they going to fix the whole world, right? How are they going to change the whole world? And of course, we do have the ability to affect the external world through our actions. But the most important part is to change the consciousness within so that we can then manifest a different reality. So the first part of awakening and the ascension process is to ultimately wake up to the fact that the world around you is simply a reflection of the internal self. Second, that the reason we have such a destructive and pain and suffering planet is due to the illusions of the mind. These are the illusionary belief systems. These are illusionary thoughts that were implanted into the collective consciousness so that we would unknowingly be continuing to create these negative events, which would just bring us more pain and suffering and more fear. And then we would fall deeper and deeper into the illusion with seemingly no way out. So the ascension process is ascending from that state into a higher state of being, into the 5D consciousness, which is full awareness, full perception, right? So as we move from the 3D, we start to move upwards in our consciousness. And what this means, if we talk about the ascension process, the first is you awaken, right? You awaken to the fact that there are lies, there is corruption, there is illusion, and we are not living in the way that we were intended to live. And that's kind of the first sudden awakening. And the ascension process involves raising our consciousness to a 5D consciousness. How do we do that? Well, first you have to deprogram the illusionary thoughts that are creating that reality. And I will cover that with the ego video. But you also have to go through a large process that includes physical healing, emotional healing, mental healing, and spiritual healing. So the physical healing, we start to come into an understanding that our physical body, again, is made up of energy, right? It is all cellular energy that is within our vessel. So we can begin to actually heal our physical bodies of pain, illness, and disease so that we are able to anchor in more 5D consciousness and energy, because you can't anchor in higher levels of consciousness and higher levels of energy if the body is in pain, illness, or disease. And all pain, illness, and disease is the root cause of that is lower consciousness thoughts and emotions simply being reflected to us. The body is a divinely intelligent vessel. So when it expresses to you pain, illness, or disease, it is saying there is a dense energy, there is a lower energy here that needs to be cleared. Because when we are functioning in a 5D state, the body is essentially self-healing. Then we work through the emotional state, which means we have to take accountability for our emotions. We have to dissolve the lower emotions and begin implementing the higher emotional states. We have to open up our hearts to full feeling, because full feeling is a huge key to unlocking our intuition, a huge key to unlocking our greater perception. So the emotional body will go through a healing process as well, transforming grief, transforming anger, transforming shame, guilt, a lot of these lower vibrational emotions that live in the vessel. We have to go through the process of healing those. And the mental body healing is a lot to do with the ego work, which we'll cover, and deconstructing the illusionary thought systems that continue to produce pain and suffering and continue to produce fear. And then we go through the spiritual body healing. And a lot of you may have remembrances of past lives, or you may kind of see a similar theme that has run through your life. And so a lot of the wounds of our spiritual body are the wounds of separation, the separation from God. And I did do a video on that. And also the wound of sin, the wound of us as a collective being programmed to feel that we are sinful, that we are bad by nature, the spiritual wound of being disconnected from the unity consciousness. And we have to, again, work through these wounds, work through these lower vibrational thoughts and emotional states and energy that's been locked in the body. And this is a process. This doesn't happen overnight. So there's all of the tools and techniques that you can use on, the ascension process in your spiritual journey to assist with these healings. But that is the process of the ascension. It is the transforming of the internal state, which includes the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies that we have. And then we kind of move into these higher levels of awareness. And so the 4D dimensional state, a lot of people call it the astral. The astral was actually dissolved in 2009 because the astral realm was where a lot of the dark ones were hiding, and they were able to manipulate our consciousness by kind of hiding in the astral realm and being able to actually manipulate physical beings and also manipulate consciousness. So the astral realm itself was dissolved. And now what the 4D dimensional state really is it's almost like a waiting room. It is simply a dimension of time and space. And it's hard for us to really make these concepts super practical because they're so vast, but just kind of view it as a waiting room. It's a space where we're in a void. We're going through still a lot of the healing, a lot of the transformation of our journey. And so we're kind of in a void space where a lot of the old starts to fall away. And this usually happens because your life before you awaken was a vibrational match to you at that time. And once you begin awakening and you begin participating in the ascension process, your vibration changes, your vibration increases. And so a lot of the old ways of life that you participated in no longer resonate. So this is usually the time of a lot of breakdowns. We do call it the void space, because this is typically when you start to feel a vibrational dissonance from people around you that maybe were in your life that were a match to the old vibration. This can also be you no longer feel resonance with your job, or you no longer feel resonance with where you live, the actual location or place that you're living, right? You don't feel resonance with the hobbies that you used to have, or you don't feel resonance with the old things that used to bring you joy. They no longer bring you that same joy. And a lot of people get really uncomfortable when they start to hit this 4D space, the void space, because it is very uncomfortable. It is literally like we are an onion. And this ascension process is an onion, and it's layers at a time that you peel away, and every layer that comes off is uncomfortable. It's like shedding an old skin. And even though we do want to shed that skin so we can birth something new, it is incredibly uncomfortable. And a lot of people, when they reach this kind of void space, a few things can happen. One, we can panic, right? Because we're entering an unknown area. Because remember, the 3D is what is known. It's what we can see. It's what we can touch. It's what we can smell. It's what we can taste. It's what we can hear. It is known energy. And again, that's only 1 to 5% of all energies in existence. And we essentially get stuck there. We only want to venture into the known. We definitely never want to venture into the unknown, because it sparks this fear and this uncomfortableness. But that is the process of ascension. We have to be able to enter the unknown and leave the known behind, because that's how you open up the other 95% of perception, the other 95% of consciousness. So it is an uncomfortable space. And a lot of people, when they reach that, they start to freak out. And so you have kind of two options when you enter that void space. You either continue on in the process and you trust and you really work on your spiritual disciplines, you really work on the inner transformation, and you keep going through that unknown, uncomfortable process, or a lot of people tend to revert back. And this can be due to attachments. Attachments to people, places, and things is a huge part of the ego programming. We never want to experience loss, right? Because for us, in our minds and our 3D perceptions, loss is final. Loss is heartbreaking. Loss is painful. But in true reality, there's no such thing as loss. It doesn't exist. Nothing can ever be lost. So sometimes we go back to the 3D dimensional state because it's known and because it's comfortable. But what inevitably happens is, because once you wake up, once you begin the process, you can never go backwards, right? We're always moving forward. Creation's always expanding. Change is the only constant. Evolution is constant. So we really can't go back. And so what happens is, if one reverts back to the third dimensional state, they might feel better initially because they start to calm down. They're in the known again, But what inevitably happens is, because you've already broken through that state, those things will start to crumble anyways, even if you try to hold on to them, even if you try to fix them or save them, whether this is a person, a place, a thing, an experience, a job, whatever it may be, it typically crumbles anyways, and then it's a much more challenging process. But I understand that a lot of us have had to have that process so that we can understand that even when we feel uncomfortable, we can't go backwards. So once we enter this unknown state, the void area, we we start to develop our spiritual gifts really in this void space, because we're letting go of so many things. We're going through healing and inner transformation, and we're coming to greater states of awareness, greater states of consciousness. And it's in the 4D space where you start to experience synchronistic events, where you start to experience miracles, where you start to experience more kind of magical things, because you've entered the unknown, but you're still in this kind of space where we often lack full clarity. We often can feel confused and just, what do I do? What's my next step? What's my direction? Because again, we're coming out of the 3D state where everything has to be known, right? We always have a plan. We're always planning ahead. We're always like making sure that everything is exactly the way that we want it to be, right? We think we have this control. And when you're in the 4D space, none of that works. None of that it actually does any good. It simply will backfire. And so right now, I would say the planet as a whole is in the 4D state. Humanity, for the most part, is still existing in the third dimensional state, but there is a good percentage of people who have risen to the 4D and borderline of 5D state. So in this 4D state that the planet's actually existing in, what the planet is doing is it's waiting for humanity to catch up. So in the next video, I will go through the prophecies and kind of the scientific and astrological and also historical findings that we have that tell us about the ascension. And it was prophesied for us to go through this ascension process, and gives us some more clues about how that process would unfold. But for now, all we really need to know is that we're in it, right? We're in the process of quantum leaps of evolution. And this is destined for us as a planet, because we were a planet that was really dedicated to learning. This is a training ground for only the strongest souls to come to, because when you enter, you go into a completely amnesic state and you have to work your way out of it. And it's very challenging to incarnate here. And, you know, the history of Earth and the history of how we arrived here will be a whole nother video as well. But what we do know for certain is that we are in an evolutionary process. We are making a quantum leap of consciousness as a collective. And this has never been done before in a physical state. So there are many other planets who have gone through their ascension process already. We are actually the last planet to go through the ascension process. And the reason for that is because we are the densest planet. We're the only planet that is existing in a third dimensional state. And there's a long history to how that occurred. But the Earth is the center of this universe, and it's a very unique planet, and humanity is a very unique species. So Source saved this planet for last because it is the heart of her universe. It was designed to be a playground for souls to come into physical, vessels, into physicality, and to be able to create on a physical level. And then it also was a training ground, right? So the beauty of this planet is extremely unique. And for that reason, it was very sought after by the dark to take control of this planet. So what happened is that we essentially went the farthest we could go into illusion. We've gone as far as we can go and learned everything we could possibly learn from the experience of illusion and from the experience of a third dimensional reality. And now that we've learned as much as we possibly could from that experience, we've gone as far into the depths as we possibly can, we have to make a quantum leap forward. And this is also going to mean that creation makes a quantum leap. So this is not just about us. This is about creation. Because again, we are the last planet to go through this ascension process. It is the hardest ascension process. So if you are here on the planet right now, you were not only chosen to be here specifically, but your soul is one of the strongest souls in existence to be able to come here and go through this process. And that is why all the galactics are here, watching Earth, supporting us, helping us as much as possible, because we are the last planet to ascend, and this is going to create a quantum leap for creation as well. So this is not just about us, this is about the whole. So as Mother Earth herself is in this 4D dimensional state, she's waiting for humanity to catch up before we truly enter the 5th dimensional state. So for those who are in the 4D space, it takes a lot of trust. It takes so much breaking down of the illusionary thought systems. But this is where we really develop our spiritual gifts, because when you're in the void, you're in the dark, right? You don't know exactly where to go or what to do. Everything feels unknown. It can feel chaotic. And it's kind of like we have to then move into the state of internal trust and internal feeling, right? Imagine walking down a dark corridor and there are no lights, and all you can see is the next step in front of you. And so you're trusting all of your senses, you're trusting yourself. This is where we also develop our connection to our angels, to our guides, and to the galactics, because we have to develop that internal connection to source, to our guides, to our angels, because they are going to guide us through this void space. So this is where our spiritual gifts really come online. This is where your perceptions, the amount of energy you're able to perceive, makes a quantum leap, because you've worked so much through the internal processes that your antenna is heightened. So you now can perceive energy. You now can receive telepathic messages. You now can advance in your connection to the etheric realm to help guide you. And as we're doing this, we are literally bringing in massive amounts of 5D energy into our vessel. So this is also a time where a lot of people start to experience what they call ascension symptoms, because your body has now detoxed and purged enough density that you can start bringing in higher levels of light. So you start experiencing synchronistic events, you start experiencing miracles, you start feeling like you are embodying more states of light. But again, there's more layers, onion layers to be peeled off. And so when we start anchoring in more light, that gets to a deeper layer of density within the body, and this often leads to what we refer to as ascension symptoms. So when you're going through those, the key is to remember these are upgrades, these are detoxes, these are activations. We don't like to stay in the mindset of I'm sick, I'm ill, right? Because then we're just falling right back into the 3rd dimensional linear thinking, which is external. Remember, we are in tune with our vessels, and we have the ability to not only transform energy, but to self-heal. And it's really all about our thought systems. It's about our mentality. That's what's going to create our reality. So in the void space, we start to really learn and see how our consciousness and how our thoughts create reality. And we start to get a lot of things mirrored back to us for us to learn, for us to be able to see where we still need to purge, where we need to release old, outdated beliefs and ways of doing things, etc. And then when we're moving from the 4D state to the 5D state, and I know a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people say, yeah, I'm in 5D, and the issue with that is, in order to really get to the 5th dimensional state of being, you have to be so anchored in with your higher self. And your higher self is your soul essence, your galactic soul essence. So as we're going from 3D to 5D, essentially we are bringing our higher self down into our vessels, right? And then we are raising our vibration so that we can meet in the middle, so that our higher self can actually come into the vessel fully embodied. So to be in the fifth dimensional state, we have to be fully anchored into love. Okay, so third dimensional state is all known. It's linear thinking, it's ego, it's known energy, and it's fear-based. The fourth dimension is all unknown. It's pure unknown energy. And then fifth dimensional states are pure love-based. So in order to enter the fifth dimensional state internally, you have to be so anchored in to love-based frequencies, which means you no longer act in ego, you no longer kind of act in lower thoughts or lower emotions, and you've risen to a level that is nearing full consciousness. And so that is where we're all headed. But in my perspective, I feel a lot of us are teetering on the fourth and fifth dimensional states, but none of us have actually anchored in fully the fifth dimensional state, because again, it's layers of the onion. This takes moments. And part of this process, and many of you have probably heard a lot of channelers and light workers talk about the activation of the DNA. So that is a big aspect of this ascension process. So again, in the third dimensional state, we're living in ego, we're living in the mind, we're living in illusion. We're living in a very limited state of perception. And the part of the reason for that was because our DNA was manipulated so that it was not fully active. And you can, reference this in science, which tells us that they can only decipher 10% of the DNA. They label the other 90% junk DNA. And I've often heard also similar references when they talk about our brain capacity, that the average human only uses between 10 to 20% of their full brain capacity. So the question is why, right? Because no organ that is in our divinely intelligent vessel that was divinely intelligently made should be operating at such a low capacity. So the question is why, right? So the reason is because that 10% of the DNA that they can decode follows a linear pattern, which means that those in lower states of consciousness can easily understand it because it follows a pattern. That 10% is what we call the programming. This is the ego programming that gets passed down through the DNA from generation to generation. It is a collection of belief systems about the known. Those are the programmings. And so the 90% of junk DNA is really DNA that does not follow a linear pattern and cannot be decoded unless you are in a higher state of consciousness, because that 90% of the junk DNA is actually God consciousness DNA. It's what was shut down purposely in our DNA to keep us in a lower state of being, into a limited state of being. And so part of the process of this ascension is that other 90% of your DNA begins to activate. This does go along with the ascension symptoms. It goes along with the kind of cycles of transformation that we go through. And so when we're peeling back these layers of the onion, we are really peeling back layers of activating our full DNA. And this takes moments, right? Our DNA cannot just fully activate because DNA is filled with light. DNA is filled with photons of light. And if those were to all activate at once and to go from a 2-strand DNA to the 12-strand DNA, if our body is holding density, which is lower frequencies, lower emotions, lower thoughts, it would be very traumatic for the body because all that light would seek to push out the density, and it would be too much and too overwhelming physically, emotionally, and mentally to do that. So we have to go through a slower process, but that is the ascension process. And so with the unlocking of the DNA, you unlock your spiritual gifts, you unlock your divine connection, you also unlock remembrance, right? Because part of our awakening and part of this ascension is not learning anything new, it's remembering. Because the truth, the creational truth of our history, of how the rest of creation functions, the universal principles, all of that is embedded into the DNA. It's kind of like a system of a library. And so when that DNA unlocks, you are flooded with remembrances, divine truths that just come to you and you just know them. Your spiritual gifts, your ability to produce your own energy, right? When you're connected to the true source, the mother, you start unlocking your true energy, which means you now become a self-sustaining being. Whereas in the third dimension, we are not connected to source consciously. And so we're in a constant kind of low energy state. And this is why we have to seek energy from others. And we have to seek energy from external sources, food, coffee, other people. We can take energy from other people as well. So when we rise finally to the full capacity of our being, we're essentially our own ecosystem and we are our own power generators. We are connected to source and we generate our own power. This is why many of you may know that, like in a fifth dimensional state, you will have no need to sleep. You can, as a meditation or as a rest. This is all going to be what you feel is best. There's no rules in 5D like that. But you won't need sleep in the same way that we need it now, because your vessel will be functioning as a crystalline vessel, as a fully powered vessel of light. You won't need food to survive. You can always eat food for joy, but you won't need it to survive in the same way that we do now. And this will also open up the brain capacity, because the brain, specifically the right brain, has been mostly shut down. The right side of the brain is the feminine side of the brain. Again, this is what connects us to the God consciousness. This is what connects us to unity consciousness. This is where imagination and intuition and insights come from. The left side of the brain, which most people operate solely from, is linear, analytical, logical, and is very attached to information and wanting to analyze and understand things. It wants to put it into something cohesive, because that's how the masculine energy works. The feminine is abstract. It has the ability to receive energy from the quantum field, which we call source. And then the left side of the brain is able to decode that. But since our right brain has pretty much been cut off, because we have been programmed to focus only on left brain thinking, we cut off our creativity and our intuition and our connection to the quantum field, which means all ideas, all possibilities, all information can be accessed through the right side of the brain. The left side of the brain is the one that decodes it, and then also organizes the information to be able to be understood and then communicated or shared, right? So mostly what we will be experiencing through this ascension is also the full activation of the brain. And you can assist yourself with doing, meditations on this, really focusing on activating the right side of the brain. And when we have 100% brain usage, and when we have 100% DNA activation, then we are now officially a galactic being. We are now in a fifth dimensional frequency, pure fifth dimensional frequency. So again, this is why it takes time to enter and really anchor in a full 5D state. But we are all getting there, and we're working in waves. There are different waves of this planetary ascension. Many people are still completely stuck in the third dimensional state. And again, they will awaken when they're ready, when they're divinely timed. You can't force this awakening. You can't force the spark of consciousness, because it has to come from within. And then you have a large wave who is in the 4D dimensional state. And then there's a small percentage who are right between the fourth and fifth. I feel we're teetering a lot, doing our best to anchor in fully. And so there's different waves of consciousness, and we're all playing our role in this ascension process. And ultimately, we will be going through this ascension process together as a collective, but it will be in waves. And so many of us will be, called to assist in the next wavers who wake up, and then the next wavers. And this is how we all kind of help each other to go through this process. So the ascension process officially began on December 21st, 2012, which was the day that the Mayan calendar ended. And so we are now 10 years into the ascension process. And as we continue through the process, everything will speed up, because remember that the biggest shift between the fourth dimensional state of the unknown and the fifth dimensional state is time. Time ceases at the fifth dimensional state. Everything is instantaneous. In the 4D state, we're in that waiting room. We're in that void. It's just a void of time and space. So time doesn't really exist, but there is a period in which we have to go through linear time in order to allow certain things to unfold within the void, to allow those layers of the onion. So once enough of us reach the fifth dimensional state, we will unlock and kind of devoid time, and things will start happening in more of an instant manifestation. And that's why the process is speeding up. The ascension is speeding up. And you may notice that you feel like time is speeding up or slowing down, or maybe seeing glitches or things like that. And that is because as more and more beings in the collective reach these higher states, everything speeds up. So the ascension process is kind of like a snowball, and once it gets going, it tends to speed up. So that's why we are seeing such rapid collapse of the old ways. And we just have to be able to understand what's happening and not focus so much on the external, but really focus on the internal. This is an internal journey. We are completely switching from the old ways, which is all external, to the internal. And that is the process of the ascension. So in the next video, I am going to cover some of the prophecies and also historical evidence of the ascension process, and also the astrological implications of the age of Aquarius, also known as the Golden Age. So just that we can get a better understanding of kind of the cycles that the earth has been through, and how it has already been predestined, and all of the kind of ways in which we can see that we are in fact destined to have this ascension process, what the prophecies say, and how it all interrelates to the present moment of now. So I thank you guys for watching. If there are any topics that any of you would like to be covered, please put it in the comments, and please feel free to share this material with anybody that you feel would resonate. For anybody that's looking for additional resources on your ascension journey, please check out our home website at 5dfulldisclosure.org, and you can find our library tab there that has a full library of resources that are downloadable, with guides, books, and manuals, and everything that you would need to kind of go deeper into understanding the ascension process and your own journey. And if any of you are looking for direct assistance and guidance and support on this journey, please check out our sessions page on our website. We're always here to assist with sessions. We also have mentorships for those that are really looking to commit and kind of make a quantum leap on their journey. So thank you all for watching, and we'll be back soon.